These three true park ranger horror stories are inspired by real events. First, a simple game of hide and seek at a family campsite goes horribly wrong, leaving a sister with a memory she can never escape. Next, a seasoned ranger begins to suspect that the people vanishing from his park aren't just getting lost, they're being chosen. And finally, an expert survivalist who knew the mountains better than anyone disappears, leaving behind a single baffling clue that defies all logical explanation. You'll want to stick around until the very end, because you'll be curious to see what was missing from the deceased man's old secure office that made this story even crazier. Toby was a kid with a laugh that could make the birds stop and listen. He was 8 years old, a compact, whirring engine of scraped knees, boundless energy, and a grin that was missing a front tooth. His favorite place in the world was the woods, especially the sprawling Catskill forest that backed up to his family's yearly campsite. This was back in '71, on a cold August evening that smelled of pine and damp earth. His family had a small, well-loved canvas tent set up in their usual spot by a creek that bubbled over rocks. It was a peaceful sound, the kind of sound that usually meant safety, summer, and the comfort of routine. His dad, a kind man with tired eyes, was trying to get a fire started, the scrape of a match and a soft curse breaking the quiet as damp kindling refused to catch. His mom was humming a tune from the radio, unpacking a cooler filled with sandwiches and soda. It was a scene of simple, unremarkable happiness, the kind you don't appreciate until it's gone forever. His older sister, Rowan, was 14, an age where she was trying very hard to be too cool for everything, but she couldn't resist her brother's relentless, joyful pestering. He'd tugged on her sleeve for a half hour, begging for just one game of hide and seek before the sun dipped below the peaks for good. She finally gave in with an exaggerated sigh, but the small smile on her face betrayed her. "Fine," she said. "One game." Toby let out a whoop of pure, unadulterated joy. It was the last truly happy sound anyone would hear from him. He ran to a big old oak tree that stood like a sentinel at the edge of the woods, its branches like dark, gnarled arms reaching for the fading light. He pressed his small face against the rough, cool bark and started to count, his voice carrying clearly through the crisp evening air. 1, 2, 3. Rowan watched him for a moment, the setting sun catching the bright red of his favorite jacket. She found an easy spot behind a cluster of thick ferns, a simple hiding place. The game wasn't about winning. It was about the thrill of the chase, the shared laughter when he finally found her. 99, 100! His voice was triumphant, filled with the certainty of a boy about to embark on a great adventure. "Ready or not, here I come." He turned from the tree, a flash of red and denim, and plunged into the deepening shadows of the forest. Rowan crouched lower behind the ferns, a smile playing on her lips. She listened. She heard the loud, deliberate snap of a twig. He was never good at being quiet. Then another, farther away. She heard the rustle of dry leaves as he ran with his clumsy 8-year-old gait. Then, nothing. The woods fell completely silent. The only sound left was the steady, indifferent bubbling of the creek. She waited, letting the silence stretch. She was giving him a chance to get good and lost, to find the perfect hiding spot. That's what a good big sister did. She waited 5 minutes, then 10. The smile had faded from her face. A little thread of annoyance started to pull at her. He was taking this too seriously, probably trying to make her give up. "Toby?" she called out, her voice sounding small against the growing dark. "Okay, you win. The game's over. Come on out." Silence. Just the creek and the wind picking up in the tops of the pines. Now the annoyance was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp prickle of fear that started in her stomach. She stood up and walked to the edge of the trees, peering into the blackness that now seemed solid, impenetrable. Toby! This isn't funny anymore. That was when the real panic set in. Her shout, thin and reedy, brought her parents running. Within minutes, their small bubble of campsite peace was shattered, the forgotten sandwiches and the dying fire suddenly obscene in their normality. Ranger Bill and his rookie partner, Miller, were the first on the scene an hour later. They found a family already coming apart at the seams. Miller was still at a point in his career where a lost kid was a logistical problem. Start a grid search, call for volunteers, follow the procedure. But Bill, he knew better. The first thing he saw was the family's dog, Buster, a big Labrador who just sat there by the edge of the trees, whining a low, continuous sound of distress. He refused to go in. A thick mist started to roll in from the creek, not like a normal fog, but like a sheet being pulled over the forest. The trees disappeared one by one, and the world became a claustrophobic bubble of gray. Bill and Miller moved in, their powerful flashlights cutting cones of light that seemed to be swallowed by the fog. Just once, through the thick, swirling vapor, Miller swore he saw a flash of that red jacket. And just once, they both heard it. A child's laughter, faint and distant. They sprinted toward it, but the sound just faded out, leaving them standing in the heavy, oppressive silence. The search became a massive, desperate operation. For a week, the woods were filled with men, a small army against the wilderness. But for the family, it was a special kind of hell. They refused to leave. They stayed at the campsite, a vigil of unending torment. The father paced the perimeter of the woods, back and forth, from sunup to sundown, a ghost in the daylight, his face gaunt and unshaven. He was a man being eroded by hope and despair. Rowan just sat on a log, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the old oak tree where Toby had last stood. Her expression was frozen, a mask of guilt and shock. She replayed those minutes in her head over and over, a silent, torturous loop. But it was the mother who broke everyone's heart. She would stand for hours at the edge of the campsite, just at the tree line, holding one of Toby's little striped sweaters. She didn't cry anymore. The tears had run out after the second day. She just watched, her eyes scanning the impenetrable wall of green and gray, as if she could will him to walk out of the trees, laughing about the great hiding spot he'd found. Every morning, Miller would see her there when he started his shift, a silent, unmoving figure. And every evening when the search parties came back, empty-handed, mud-caked and exhausted, she would still be there, a statue carved from grief. The lack of a single trace was what drove the madness home. No jacket, no shoe, not a single sign. It was like he had vanished from the face of the earth. After a week of searching, they called it off. The officials came, kind but firm, their voices soft with practiced sympathy, and explained that there was nothing more they could do. The family was broken. The community was in shock, and the woods went back to being quiet. Ranger Miller had to help them pack up their camp. It was the worst thing he'd ever had to do. He folded Toby's empty sleeping bag, the small indentation where his head had been still visible. He saw his little toothbrush in a plastic cup by the camp sink. He watched Toby's father gently lead his wife to the car. She didn't fight, but her eyes never left the silent, waiting trees. The dog, Buster, had to be pulled away from the tree line, and as the car door shut, he let out a low, mournful howl that echoed through the valley. Miller never forgot it. He retired from being a ranger a few years later. The Catskills never looked the same to him after that. Every time he saw a patch of mist or heard the wind through the trees, he thought about that August night in 1971. He didn't think about strange lights or inexplicable sounds. He thought of a boy with a missing front tooth, a boy who loved to run. He thought of a sister frozen by a game that never ended. And he thought of a mother, standing at the edge of the world, holding a little sweater and waiting for a ghost. He thought about the terrible, quiet truth of it all. Because some things, no matter how hard you look, they just don't want to be found. They are content to stay right where they are, hidden, leaving behind nothing but a hole in the world and a pain that never, ever goes away. A forest ranger like Chris would tell you that the Pacific Northwest green is a different kind of green. It's heavy. It gets in your bones and soaks up sound, soaks up secrets. He'd spent 30 years in these woods, a career that started with youthful optimism and settled into a quiet, weary respect for the power of the wilderness. He knew its rhythms, its dangers, and its deceptive beauty. He knew some secrets are heavier than others. Sometime back in the late 90s, a cluster of disappearances began, spanning into the early 2000s. This wasn't a story for the TV news, with a clear villain and a simple motive. This was his jurisdiction, his problem. And it was quiet, clean. It was like the world was tidying up and people were the clutter. It started with a guy named Ryan. This one hit different because Chris knew him. Not well, but he knew his truck, knew his quiet nod at the ranger station. Ryan was a climber, an expert, the kind of guy who never made mistakes. He was meticulous, the type to check his knots 3 times and lay out his gear on a tarp before every trip. When he went missing on a remote, well-worn trail, Chris felt a knot of professional concern tighten into something personal. They searched for 4 days, a grid search that turned up nothing but the oppressive, indifferent silence of the deep woods. Then, on the 5th day, they found the site. It wasn't just a backpack. It was propped neatly against a tree, almost like a display. Beside it, his compass and water bottle were arranged on a flat rock, perfectly parallel. And around them, scratched into the dirt with a stick, were a series of strange, interlocking symbols Chris didn't recognize. At the time, they were just another layer of weird in a growing file of the unexplainable. An anomaly he photographed, sketched, and documented, but couldn't begin to understand. That's when Chris felt it. The day was warm, the air thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, but a pocket of unnatural cold hung in the air right around the site. It was a tangible thing, a cold that didn't just touch your skin, but seemed to sink right through it. He felt the hairs on his arms stand up. The K9 team arrived, eager and loud, their barks echoing through the trees. They tracked Ryan's scent perfectly from the trailhead, their handlers jogging to keep up. But as they got closer to the bizarrely placed pack and the strange symbols, their entire demeanor changed. The confident barks died in their throats. They slowed, whining, their bodies low to the ground. Right at the edge of that cold spot, they didn't just stop. They whimpered, a high, thin sound of pure distress, pulling back on their leashes with all their strength, refusing to even look at the symbols on the ground. It was pure, primal fear. 2 years went by. In the service, rangers get the option to transfer to a new park every 3 years or so. Chris took it, moving his life a few hundred miles north. He told himself it was for the new scenery, but deep down, he was running from the memory of that cold spot. But the woods are all connected and they don't forget. Not long after he settled in, the call came. A family, Mark, Sarah, and their son Jacob, had vanished. Chris felt the dread return like a sickness. As the new ranking officer, he led the initial search. He found their last known trail marker, a small cairn of rocks. Next to it, Sitting upright was Jacob's teddy bear. It was perfectly clean, placed precisely in the center of a small, carefully arranged circle of stones. And beneath it, nearly hidden in the pine needles, were the same interlocking symbols. It wasn't a sudden epiphany. It was a slow, cold wave of impossibility washing over him in the quiet of the woods. The exact same staging, hundreds of miles away. That night, sleep was impossible. He drove to the station, unlocked his office, and pulled the old scanned photos from the Ryan case file. He laid them next to the digital pictures he'd just taken. The symbols weren't similar. They were identical. He started digging obsessively. It became a quiet, consuming second job. He spent his nights in the dusty archives of the local library, scrolling through endless reels of microfiche, searching for anything that could explain the symbols. He wasn't looking for monsters. He was looking for an answer, any answer. He found a ghost of a possibility in a small, buried article from the late 80s. A local news report about a small, unnamed cult that had been run out of the area for performing strange rituals deep in the national park. The article was thin on details, mentioning their belief that the forest was a temple. It wasn't proof. It was nothing. But the thought took root in his mind, a seed of horrifying speculation. It felt impossible, but it was the only thing that came close to making a terrible kind of sense. The fight for Chris was no longer just with the woods. It was with this sickening new theory. His official reports connecting the two scenes, highlighting the identical symbols, were dismissed as unsubstantiated conjecture. He was gaslighted with the polite, firm language of bureaucracy, turning a potential pattern of intelligent, malevolent action into a simple case of people getting lost. The core conflict for Chris wasn't just with the agency, it was with his own sanity. He started to feel watched on the trails. He knew the official story was a lie. He didn't have an answer, only a terrible question that no one else was willing to ask. He was haunted by the chilling possibility that the victims weren't lost by chance. They were chosen. The final image of the story isn't some monster. It's Chris, years later, looking out over the misty forest he used to love. The silence is no longer peaceful. He knows the forest isn't empty. It's just full of blank spots where the offerings might have been made. He knows the truth. They tell you tens of thousands of people need search and rescue every year. They tell you that wandering off the trail is the biggest cause. They want you to think it's all just simple accidents. But Chris knows the other numbers. He knows that in a recent 5-year span, more than 1,000 people were officially reported missing in our national parks. Nearly half of them are hikers, people like you, people like Ryan who know what they're doing. People who don't just wander off. So when you go to the woods, don't think about what you don't see. Think about the quiet, tidy places, the strange symbols in the dirt, and the 1,000 other people who stepped off the map. And ask yourself, are you just lost or have you been chosen? Finding Ranger Justin didn't solve a thing. After 3 long years of silence from the high country, you'd think locating him would bring some kind of peace, some final chapter to a terrible story. But it didn't. It just cracked open a new one, something far stranger and more disturbing than just a man going missing in the mountains. When a handful of persistent searchers finally stumbled upon what was left of him in the fall of 2002, they didn't bring closure back down from that mountain. They brought back a heavy load of questions, the kind that settle deep in your gut and stay there, unanswered and ugly. Justin was a fixture in the Sierra Nevada, a man practically carved from the same granite as the peaks he patrolled. He wasn't some seasonal hire, fresh-faced and learning the ropes. He had put in 23 solid years as a backcountry park ranger in Kings Canyon National Park. A quarter of a century of his life was spent with his boots on those trails, in every kind of weather you can imagine. He wasn't just familiar with that country, he was a part of it. He was the undisputed master of that wilderness, as reliable as the sunrise and twice as prepared as the harshest winter. He knew every trail, every shortcut, every hidden drainage, and every single spot where the weather could flip and turn deadly in the space of an hour. He was the guy you sent for when someone else got lost. To the men and women who worked alongside him, who relied on his calm voice over the radio, Justin was simply untouchable. It was the middle of June, 1999, when he decided to head out on what he logged as a routine patrol. Just a standard trip deep into the high country, up around the remote Ray Lakes Loop area. The note he left pinned at his outpost was exactly what you'd expect from a man like him. Away for 3 to 5 days. It was straightforward, professional, the kind of note he'd left 100 times before. But it was what he didn't take with him that turns this story sideways. Locked securely inside his personal heavy-gauge metal storage box was his service-issued .357 Magnum revolver. You have to stop and really think about what that means. This is the High Sierra. It's majestic, sure, but it's a place that is utterly indifferent to human life. It is an isolated, unpredictable, and often dangerous country. Every single seasoned ranger carried their weapon. It wasn't for show. It was a tool, the last line of defense against a cornered black bear, a territorial mountain lion, or maybe the most unpredictable animal of all, another person who'd gone bad in the wilderness. It was just part of the job. But Justin, the most seasoned of them all, had deliberately secured his own gun away. He locked it up as if he was completely, 100% certain that he would not need it. That single choice screams 2 terrifying possibilities down through the years. The first is that he was absolutely sure that no conventional trouble, nothing a bullet could stop, was waiting for him out there. The second, and far worse, is that he knew exactly what kind of trouble he was walking into, and he understood that a handgun would be laughably, utterly useless against it. The last time anyone saw him alive, he was the picture of a man at peace in his element. A small group of hikers passed him on the Bubbs Creek Trail. They later said he was cheerful, that he gave them a friendly wave and kept heading deeper into the mountains. He was moving with that quiet, focused confidence of a man walking through his own backyard. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The summer was at its peak. Justin was right where he was supposed to be, doing what he was born to do. And then just nothing. The scheduled time for his first radio check-in came and went. The dispatcher at the station tried to raise him, but the only sound that came back was the sharp, empty crackle of static. No voice, no word, just a hiss of white noise coming out of the speaker, a sound like an empty seashell held to your ear. A day dragged by, then 2. By the end of the week, the feeling of professional concern among the park staff had soured, curdling into a thick, real panic. The official alarm was raised, and one of the largest and most intensive search and rescue operations in the park's long history was launched. They threw everything they had at that search. Helicopters beat the air in the canyons, their powerful rotors echoing for miles, the observers inside scanning the vast broken landscape below for any sign of color that wasn't rock or tree. They brought in teams of scent dogs, their handlers jogging alongside them, urging them on, their noses to the ground, searching for a single trace on the wind. Hundreds of people, highly trained search and rescue professionals, local folks who knew the mountains and volunteered their time, and dozens of fellow rangers who felt like they were looking for their own brother, combed that country. They walked in long, straight lines, shoulder to shoulder, trying to cover millions of acres of some of the most unforgiving terrain in North America. They were fighting not just the wilderness, but the ghost of the man who knew it best. They yelled his name until their throats were raw, but the only answer they ever got was the mocking echo of their own voices, thrown back at them by the high, cold, indifferent granite. How can the master of that terrain, the one man who knew every secret route and every hidden place, just vanish off the face of the earth? There was no broken gear found on a trail, no sign of a fall from a ledge, no evidence of a struggle, no disturbed ground. He wasn't found washed down a creek, and there was nothing to suggest he'd had a simple, tragic accident. Justin, the expert, was gone. He had left nothing behind but a profound and unnerving silence. You can't search forever. Eventually, the Park Service had to make the hard call. They filed the paperwork, and the massive search was officially suspended. For 3 years, that was the only story. Justin, the ranger who walked into the mountains and was swallowed by them. The winter snows came, burying the park deep under 20 feet of white, muffling the entire landscape in a thick, frozen quiet. Then the summer melt came, and the runoff washed the terrain clean all over again. Time just kept grinding forward, marked only by the turning of the seasons. The only sound up there was the constant thin whistle of the wind blowing through the high, empty passes. Then came the fall of 2002. A small, dedicated team, people who just couldn't let the file gather dust on a shelf, went back into the field on their own time. They started methodically picking their way through the Window Peak drainage, a rugged, isolated place. And here's the key detail, the one that makes the whole story tilt into the impossible. That same area had already been searched multiple times and officially cleared by the initial teams. This is where the facts stop making any kind of sense to a rational person. The first thing they found wasn't Justin. It was his radio. His big, heavy green Park Service radio, his only link to the civilized world, was sitting on a flat, dry piece of rock. It was perched right on top of a 12-foot waterfall. The constant roar of the water rushing down into the pool below filled the air, but the radio itself was nowhere near the spray. It was high and dry. It hadn't been washed up there by a flood. The location made that a physical impossibility. It had been placed there, placed deliberately by a hand. Someone or something had taken the time to climb up that slick rock and carefully set the ranger's final piece of technology on that ledge, out of sight. The searcher who found it later said it looked like some kind of offering on a stone altar. His remains were found not long after, in that same drainage. It was a grim confirmation of a tragic end, but it did nothing to explain the mystery. It only deepened it. The full, terrifying scope of the situation became clear when they tallied up what was there and what was missing. First, you have the radio, deliberately placed high up on a dry stone. That suggests intelligence and maybe even a message. Second, you have the remains themselves, found in an area that had been thoroughly searched and cleared multiple times over the previous years. That suggests that whatever happened to him, the evidence was kept hidden until it was decided the time was right for it to be found. But the final fact, the one that still makes the hair stand up on the backs of the necks of the people who know this story, was about the weapon. After Justin was officially declared missing and presumed dead, his personal effects were gathered as part of the case file. The locked metal box containing his revolver was taken from his station and placed in a secure official evidence locker, a standard procedure. And for years it sat there. But when his remains were discovered and the investigation was revisited, They opened that secure locker. The box was still there, but the revolver inside was gone. It had vanished from a locked box, inside a locked room, miles away from the wilderness, just as its owner had vanished from the mountains. That's not an accident. That's not a coincidence. That is a choice. The official file speaks about the unfortunate and unforgiving nature of the Sierra Nevada, but in the deep listening silence of those high peaks, there are only two facts that anyone who truly knows the case can be sure of. First, Ranger Justin, the expert of experts, walked out that day knowing he wouldn't need his gun. And second, whatever took his life didn't just leave his remains, it left a statement. It carefully placed the radio as a marker, and then, inexplicably, it took the locked-away revolver and carried it into the wilderness, where it, too, disappeared forever.